Question 1. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Slovakian citizen, legally licensed to carry a firearm under Group A, is walking through a public park and notices a group of individuals exhibiting aggressive behavior and speaking loudly in a manner that suggests potential confrontation. What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Continue walking as if nothing is happening, ignoring the group's behavior to avoid any potential conflict. Option B. Discreetly assess the situation, maintain awareness of surroundings, and only consider drawing the firearm if an immediate and credible threat to life or serious bodily harm materializes. Option C. Approach the group directly and inquire about their intentions, making them aware of the firearm they are carrying. Option D. Immediately draw the firearm and verbally warn the individuals to back away, asserting their right to carry. The correct answer is B. Discreetly assess the situation, maintain awareness of surroundings, and only consider drawing the firearm if an immediate and credible threat to life or serious bodily harm materializes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms license holder in Slovakia concerning the carrying of a firearm under Group A. The challenge lies in balancing the legal right to carry a firearm with the ethical responsibility to act with prudence and avoid unnecessary escalation or perceived threats. The holder must interpret situations accurately and respond in a manner that upholds public safety and their own legal standing, without resorting to premature or unjustified displays of their weapon. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves discreetly and calmly assessing the situation, maintaining situational awareness, and only drawing attention to the firearm if an immediate, credible threat to life or limb arises that cannot be de-escalated through other means. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible firearm ownership and the spirit of Slovakian firearms legislation, which permits carrying for self-defense but does not endorse provocative or alarmist behavior. The law expects licensed individuals to exercise sound judgment and restraint, prioritizing de-escalation and avoiding actions that could be misconstrued as aggressive or threatening. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately displaying the firearm to deter potential aggressors. This is ethically problematic as it escalates the situation, potentially provoking an unwarranted response and creating a greater risk to public safety. Legally, it could be viewed as an unnecessary display of force, potentially violating regulations that govern the responsible carrying of firearms and could lead to license revocation. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the perceived threat entirely and continue with normal activities without any heightened awareness. This is professionally negligent as it fails to acknowledge a potential danger and leaves the individual vulnerable. While not an overt violation, it demonstrates a lack of the vigilance expected of a licensed firearm holder and could have severe consequences if the threat materializes. A third incorrect approach is to verbally confront the individuals and make them aware of the firearm. This is also problematic as it can be perceived as a threat or intimidation, leading to escalation and potentially placing the individual in a more dangerous position. It bypasses the principle of discreet self-defense and can be seen as an unprofessional and reckless use of their license status. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Slovakia holding a group a firearms license should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes situational assessment, de-escalation, and proportional response. This involves 1. Continuous observation and assessment of the environment for potential threats. 2. Prioritizing non-confrontational methods to resolve or avoid conflict. 3. If a direct and immediate threat to life or serious injury is present, then and only then consider the lawful and responsible use of the firearm, which may include drawing it in a manner that is not overtly threatening but ready for immediate use if necessary. The decision to draw or display a firearm should be a last resort, based on a clear and present danger. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows that an applicant for a group of firearms license in Slovakia has provided a clean criminal record and stated a legitimate personal protection reason for carrying a firearm. However, during the interview, the applicant exhibits a slightly agitated demeanor and makes a passing, albeit vague, comment about a past dispute with a neighbor that was resolved. How should the licensing authority proceed to ensure compliance with Slovak firearms regulations and ethical public safety obligations? Option A. Conduct a more in-depth inquiry into the past dispute, seeking corroborating information from relevant parties if possible, and thoroughly document the applicant's demeanor and the nature of the comment before making a final decision. Option B. Issue a warning to the applicant about their demeanor and the comment, and then grant the license, considering the issue resolved. Option C. Grant the license immediately, as the applicant has met the basic requirements and the comment about the dispute was vague and seemingly resolved. Option D. Deny the license based on the agitated demeanor and the mention of a past dispute, assuming it indicates a potential for future conflict. The correct answer is A. Conduct a more in-depth inquiry into the past dispute, seeking corroborating information from relevant parties if possible, and thoroughly document the applicant's demeanor and the nature of the comment before making a final decision. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing an individual's suitability for a group of firearms license in Slovakia, which involves carrying a firearm, requires a rigorous examination of their character, mental stability, and adherence to legal and ethical standards. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the applicant's desire for a license against the paramount public safety interest. The licensing authority must balance individual rights with the collective need for security, making objective and ethical decision-making crucial. The best approach involves a thorough, unbiased assessment of all provided documentation and a comprehensive interview, strictly adhering to the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act, Zakon o Zbraniach a Streliv. This includes verifying the applicant's stated reasons for needing to carry a firearm, cross-referencing their criminal record, and any reported incidents of aggression or instability, and evaluating their understanding of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework governing its use. The ethical justification lies in the licensing authority's duty to protect the public by ensuring only responsible and law-abiding citizens are entrusted with firearms. This approach prioritizes due diligence and adherence to established legal criteria, minimizing the risk of issuing a license to an unsuitable individual. An approach that relies solely on the applicant's personal testimony without independent verification is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the due diligence requirements mandated by Slovak law, which necessitates objective evidence of suitability. It also presents an ethical failure by potentially overlooking critical red flags that could compromise public safety. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the license based on the applicant's perceived social standing or connections, disregarding any potential concerns raised during the background check. This constitutes a severe ethical breach, as it prioritizes favoritism over public safety and violates the principle of equal application of the law. Such an action undermines the integrity of the licensing process and erodes public trust. Finally, an approach that dismisses minor past infractions as irrelevant without a proper assessment of their context and potential implications for responsible firearm carriage is also flawed. Slovak law requires a holistic review, and even seemingly minor incidents can indicate a pattern of behavior that is incompatible with carrying a firearm. This approach risks underestimating potential risks and failing to uphold the licensing authority's duty of care. Professionals tasked with evaluating firearms license applications should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly defining the legal and ethical obligations under the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act. 2. Conducting a comprehensive and objective review of all submitted documentation and background checks. 3. Engaging in a structured interview designed to elicit relevant information and assess the applicant's demeanor and understanding. 4. Critically evaluating all information, giving due weight to any potential risk factors. 5. Documenting the entire decision-making process thoroughly. 6. Making a final decision based solely on established legal criteria and the evidence presented, prioritizing public safety above all else. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Slovak citizen, legally licensed for group of firearm carrying, witnesses a heated verbal dispute escalating in a public park. The dispute involves two individuals who are becoming increasingly agitated. The license holder is aware of their legal right to carry their firearm. Considering the ethical implications and the spirit of Slovak firearms legislation, what is the most professionally responsible course of action for the license holder in this situation? Option A. Remain calm, avoid any confrontational behavior, and if possible, discreetly move away from the immediate vicinity of the dispute without displaying the firearm. Option B. Immediately and visibly display the firearm as a deterrent to de-escalate the situation. Option C. Verbally intervene in the dispute while making no attempt to conceal the firearm. Option D. Leave the firearm secured in a nearby vehicle and then attempt to verbally intervene in the dispute. The correct answer is A. Remain calm, avoid any confrontational behavior, and if possible, discreetly move away from the immediate vicinity of the dispute without displaying the firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms license holder in Slovakia concerning the carrying of a firearm under Group A. The challenge lies in balancing the legal right to carry a firearm with the ethical responsibility to act with utmost discretion and avoid any perception of intimidation or misuse of that right, especially in a public or semi-public setting where personal disputes might arise. The holder must navigate the fine line between asserting their right and potentially escalating a situation through their visible armament. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation and prioritizing public safety and the responsible image of licensed firearm holders. This approach requires the individual to remain calm, avoid any confrontational behavior, and if possible, remove themselves from the immediate vicinity of the dispute without displaying their firearm. The justification for this approach is rooted in the ethical principles of responsible gun ownership, which extend beyond mere legal compliance. Slovak law, while permitting carrying of firearms under Group A, implicitly expects holders to act with prudence and to not use their firearm as a tool for intimidation or personal disputes. The ethical imperative is to prevent any situation that could lead to accidental discharge, misuse, or public alarm, thereby upholding the trust placed in licensed individuals. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately and visibly displaying the firearm as a deterrent. This is ethically unacceptable as it can be perceived as aggressive, intimidating, and escalatory. It directly contradicts the principle of responsible firearm handling and could provoke a panicked reaction from others, potentially leading to a dangerous situation. Legally, while carrying is permitted, using the firearm's presence to intimidate is not within the spirit or intent of the law and could lead to scrutiny or revocation of the license. Another incorrect approach is to engage verbally with the individuals involved in the dispute while making no attempt to conceal the firearm. This approach fails to recognize the inherent tension created by the visible firearm and the potential for the dispute to escalate due to its presence. It also risks drawing undue attention to the firearm and its holder, potentially making them a target or inadvertently involving them more deeply in a conflict they are trying to avoid. The ethical failure here is the lack of proactive risk management and the passive acceptance of a potentially volatile situation being exacerbated by the firearm. A third incorrect approach is to leave the firearm in a vehicle and then attempt to intervene verbally in the dispute. While this avoids the immediate visual intimidation of the firearm, it still involves the license holder in a potentially volatile situation without the means to defend themselves if the situation turns violent. This could be seen as an imprudent decision, as the license was granted for carrying, implying a readiness for responsible use if legally and ethically necessitated. The ethical failure is in not adequately assessing the risk of the situation and potentially placing oneself in unnecessary danger by disarming oneself in a potentially confrontational environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and public safety. This involves a rapid assessment of the situation, considering the potential for escalation and the impact of their actions, including the presence of their firearm, on others. The primary goal should always be to avoid conflict and prevent harm. If a dispute arises, the most responsible course of action is to disengage, remove oneself from the situation if possible, and avoid any actions that could be perceived as threatening or provocative. This aligns with the ethical obligations of licensed firearm holders to be responsible stewards of their privilege and to contribute to public safety, rather than potentially compromising it. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Slovak citizen holding a valid group of firearm license for carrying a firearm intends to attend a parent-teacher meeting at their child's primary school. Considering the sensitive nature of carrying a firearm in an educational setting, what is the most professionally responsible course of action to ensure compliance with both legal requirements and ethical considerations in Slovakia? Option A. Arrive at the school with the firearm and then inform the school administration of their presence and the reason for carrying it. Option B. Discreetly inform individual teachers or staff members upon arrival about carrying the firearm, rather than approaching the main administration. Option C. Carry the firearm to the meeting as permitted by their group a license, assuming their legal right is sufficient justification. Option D. Inform the school administration, and potentially the local police department, in advance of their intention to carry the firearm to the meeting, explaining the necessity and seeking their understanding. The correct answer is D. Inform the school administration and potentially the local police department in advance of their intention to carry the firearm to the meeting, explaining the necessity and seeking their understanding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a firearm license holder's right to carry and the potential for public unease or perceived threat, especially in a sensitive location like a school. The professional must navigate the legal framework for carrying firearms in Slovakia, while also considering the ethical implications of their actions and their impact on the community. The challenge lies in balancing individual rights with public safety and maintaining trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively communicating with the relevant authorities and the educational institution prior to carrying the firearm on school grounds. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, respect for public concern, and adherence to the spirit of the law, which prioritizes safety and order. By informing the school administration and potentially the local police, the license holder can ensure that their actions are understood, authorized, and do not cause undue alarm, thereby upholding the responsible use of their firearm license. This aligns with the general principles of responsible firearm ownership and the need to avoid actions that could be misinterpreted as threatening. Incorrect approach is analysis. Carrying the firearm without any prior notification to the school or authorities, relying solely on the legality of the license, fails to consider the potential for public perception and the specific sensitivities surrounding educational environments. This approach disregards the ethical obligation to be mindful of how one's actions might affect others and could lead to unnecessary panic or a complaint, even if technically legal. Contacting the school administration only after arriving on school grounds with the firearm is reactive and does not allow for proper planning or reassurance. This could still create a situation of immediate alarm and distrust, undermining the professional and responsible image expected of a firearm license holder. Seeking permission from individual teachers or staff members upon arrival, rather than the designated school administration, bypasses the proper channels of communication and authority within the institution. This approach is disorganized and unprofessional, failing to address the situation with the necessary level of official awareness and approval. Professional reasoning. Professionals in possession of firearms licenses in Slovakia should adopt a proactive and communicative approach when intending to carry a firearm in a location with heightened sensitivities, such as a school. The decision-making process should prioritize informing relevant authorities and stakeholders in advance. This involves understanding not only the letter of the law, but also the ethical responsibilities associated with firearm ownership and the importance of maintaining public confidence. A framework of transparency, respect for community concerns, and adherence to established protocols will guide responsible actions. Question 5. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Slovakian citizen holding a valid group of firearm license for carrying a firearm is attending a public community event in Bratislava. Considering the ethical implications and legal framework governing firearm possession in Slovakia, what is the most professionally responsible course of action regarding the carrying of their firearm? Option A. Carry the firearm openly in a visible holster, as permitted by the license, to signal responsible ownership and deter potential threats. Option B. Place the firearm in a designated public locker at the event entrance for safekeeping during the duration of their attendance. Option C. Discreetly carry the firearm in a secure, concealed manner, ensuring it is not visible to the public and is not readily accessible unless a genuine threat arises. Option D. Intentionally display the firearm briefly to security personnel to confirm their status as a licensed carrier and to ensure their presence is acknowledged. The correct answer is C. Discreetly carry the firearm in a secure, concealed manner, ensuring it is not visible to the public and is not readily accessible unless a genuine threat arises. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearm license holder in Slovakia concerning the carrying of a firearm under Group A. Challenge lies in balancing the legal right to carry a firearm with the ethical responsibility to ensure public safety and avoid unnecessary alarm. The holder must exercise sound judgment in deciding when and where to carry their firearm, considering the potential impact on others, and adhering strictly to Slovakian legal provisions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves discreetly carrying the firearm in a manner that is not visible to the public, ensuring it is secured and not readily accessible for immediate use unless a genuine threat necessitates it. This approach aligns with the spirit and letter of Slovakian law regarding the carrying of firearms, which prioritizes public safety and prevents the creation of public unease. The law implicitly expects responsible licensees to act in a manner that does not cause undue alarm or provoke dangerous situations. This discreet carrying method respects the rights of others and minimizes the risk of accidental display or misuse, thereby upholding the ethical obligation of a firearm license holder. Incorrect approach is analysis. Carrying the firearm openly and visibly, even if holstered, is professionally unacceptable. This action directly contravenes the implicit expectation of responsible firearm carriage by potentially causing public alarm and anxiety, which is contrary to the principles of public safety and responsible gun ownership. It could also be interpreted as provocative and may lead to unwarranted attention or intervention from law enforcement, even if the license is valid. Displaying the firearm intentionally to assert authority or as a deterrent in a non-threatening situation is also professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a misuse of the privilege granted by the firearm license. Such behavior can escalate minor disputes, create a hostile environment, and is a clear violation of the ethical duty to act with restraint and responsibility. It also risks misinterpretation by bystanders and authorities, potentially leading to legal repercussions. Leaving the firearm unsecured in a public place, even for a short period, is a grave professional and ethical failure. This directly endangers public safety by creating a high risk of theft or unauthorized access, which could lead to its use in criminal activity. Slovakian law strictly mandates the secure storage and carriage of firearms, and such negligence would be a severe breach of these regulations and a profound ethical lapse. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Slovakia holding a firearm license must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes public safety, legal compliance, and ethical conduct. This involves a continuous assessment of the environment and the necessity of carrying the firearm. The primary consideration should always be whether carrying the firearm is both legally permissible and ethically justifiable in the specific context, with a strong emphasis on discretion and security to prevent any potential harm or alarm to the public. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Slovak citizen holding a firearms license for carrying a firearm is grappling with a personal ethical dilemma regarding the use of their firearm in a situation that, while not explicitly prohibited by law, feels morally questionable to them. Considering the strict regulatory framework for firearms in Slovakia, which of the following represents the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Interpret the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act based on personal ethical convictions, selectively adhering to the license's conditions only when they align with their moral compass. Option B. Disregard the legal requirements and carry the firearm according to personal beliefs, assuming that minor deviations from the law will not be detected or prosecuted by Slovak authorities. Option C. Adhere strictly to the legal requirements and conditions stipulated by the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act and their specific license, seeking official clarification if personal beliefs create an insurmountable conflict, or considering relinquishing the license if compliance is impossible. Option D. Carry the firearm in a manner that aligns with personal ethical beliefs, even if it deviates from the explicit conditions of the license, believing that a higher moral principle justifies the action. The correct answer is C. Adhere strictly to the legal requirements and conditions stipulated by the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act and their specific license, seeking official clarification if personal beliefs create an insurmountable conflict, or considering relinquishing the license if compliance is impossible. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a licensee's personal beliefs and the strict legal requirements for firearm possession and carrying in Slovakia. The licensee is entrusted with a significant responsibility, and their personal ethical framework must align with, or at least not contravene, the established legal and ethical standards governing firearms. The challenge lies in navigating this personal conflict without compromising public safety or violating the law. Careful judgment is required to ensure that personal beliefs do not lead to actions that could endanger others or undermine the integrity of the firearms licensing system. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing legal compliance and public safety above personal beliefs when these beliefs conflict with the law. This approach requires the licensee to acknowledge that their personal ethical stance on carrying a firearm in specific situations, even if driven by a desire to avoid perceived harm, cannot override the explicit legal framework established by Slovak law for group of firearms licenses. The licensee must adhere to the conditions and restrictions stipulated by their license and the relevant Slovak legislation, which dictates when and where a firearm may be carried. If personal beliefs create an insurmountable conflict, the responsible course of action is to seek clarification from authorities or, if necessary, relinquish the license rather than risk noncompliance. This upholds the principle that legal obligations in sensitive areas like firearms control are paramount. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves selectively adhering to the license based on personal ethical interpretations. This is professionally unacceptable because it undermines the rule of law. The Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act, Zakon o Zbrani Streliv, and associated regulations are clear and binding. Personal interpretations, however well-intentioned, do not create exceptions to these laws. Such an approach risks legal repercussions and compromises public safety by creating an unpredictable standard for firearm carriage. Another incorrect approach is to carry the firearm in a manner that deviates from the license's conditions due to personal ethical objections, believing that such a deviation is justified by a higher moral principle. This is ethically and legally flawed. While personal ethics are important, they cannot supersede legal mandates, especially concerning items that pose a significant risk if misused or carried improperly. The Slovak legal framework for firearms is designed to balance individual rights with collective security, and personal ethical judgments cannot unilaterally alter this balance. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the legal requirements and carry the firearm in a manner that aligns with personal beliefs, assuming that the authorities will not discover or prosecute such deviations. This demonstrates a severe lack of professional integrity and a disregard for the legal and ethical responsibilities associated with a firearms license. It prioritizes personal convenience or conviction over legal duty and public safety, which is a direct violation of the trust placed in licensed individuals. Professional reasoning. Professionals in possession of firearms licenses in Slovakia must adopt a decision-making process that is grounded in strict adherence to the law and a commitment to public safety. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing all legal requirements and conditions associated with their specific firearms license, Group A in this case. 2. Regularly reviewing and staying updated on any changes to Slovak firearms legislation. 3. Critically assessing personal beliefs and ethical frameworks to ensure they do not create a conflict with legal obligations. 4. If a conflict arises, seeking official clarification from the relevant Slovak authorities, e.g., the police department responsible for firearms licensing. 5. If the conflict remains irreconcilable, considering the responsible step of surrendering the license rather than engaging in any action that could be construed as non-compliant. 6. Prioritizing the safety and security of the public above all personal considerations when exercising the privilege of carrying a firearm. Question 7. The assessment process reveals an applicant for a group of firearm license in Slovakia has expressed significant anxiety about their personal safety due to past negative experiences, though these did not result in a criminal conviction. The applicant states they feel a firearm is essential for their protection. Considering the strict requirements for carrying a firearm in Slovakia, which of the following approaches best demonstrates professional judgment and adherence to the law? Option A. Focus primarily on the applicant's stated need for self-defense, overlooking potential concerns about their psychological state or past behavior that might not have led to a criminal record. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's statement and any available background information, objectively assessing their suitability against all legal criteria for a group A license, including reliability and mental fitness, while documenting the entire process. Option C. Deny the license solely because the applicant's past experiences, even without a conviction, suggest a potentially unstable temperament, without a full assessment of current suitability. Option D. Grant the license based on the applicant's expressed fear and perceived need for self-defense, assuming their anxiety necessitates immediate firearm possession for their protection. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's statement and any available background information, objectively assessing their suitability against all legal criteria for a Group A license, including reliability and mental fitness, while documenting the entire process. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a firearm license holder's right to self-defense and the strict legal and ethical obligations to ensure public safety and responsible firearm ownership in Slovakia. The applicant's past behavior, even if not resulting in a criminal conviction, raises concerns about their temperament and judgment, which are critical factors in determining suitability for carrying a firearm. Careful judgment is required to balance individual rights with the paramount need for public safety, adhering strictly to the Slovak legal framework governing firearms. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented evaluation of all provided information, including the applicant's statement and any relevant background checks, against the specific criteria outlined in Slovak firearms legislation. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law and established procedures, ensuring that the decision is based on factual evidence and legal requirements rather than personal bias or assumptions. Specifically, it requires a comprehensive review of the applicant's mental state, reliability, and any history that might indicate a propensity for misuse of a firearm, as mandated by the relevant sections of the Firearms and Ammunition Act. The decision-making process must be transparent and justifiable under Slovak law, focusing on whether the applicant meets all statutory requirements for a Group A license, which includes demonstrating a genuine need and the absence of any disqualifying factors. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the applicant's concerns about their past solely based on the absence of a criminal conviction. While a conviction is a clear disqualifier, Slovak law also considers other factors that might indicate unsuitability, such as a demonstrated lack of reliability or a tendency towards aggression. Ignoring the applicant's stated fears and the potential implications for their judgment, even without a formal conviction, risks overlooking a critical aspect of their suitability. This approach fails to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, as required by the spirit and letter of Slovak firearms regulations, which aim to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of individuals who may pose a risk to themselves or others. Another incorrect approach involves making a decision based on sympathy or a desire to expedite the process, without fully scrutinizing the applicant's stated reasons and potential underlying issues. While empathy is a valuable trait, it cannot override the legal obligations to ensure public safety. Rushing to judgment or overlooking potential red flags because the applicant expresses distress or a perceived need for a firearm can lead to a decision that is not legally sound and potentially compromises public safety. This bypasses the due diligence mandated by Slovak law for all firearms license applications. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the applicant's stated need for self-defense, without adequately assessing their overall suitability and the potential risks associated with their psychological state or past experiences. While a genuine need is a component of the application, it is not the sole determinant. The licensing authority must conduct a holistic review, considering all statutory requirements, including the applicant's reliability, mental fitness, and any other factors that could impact responsible firearm ownership, as stipulated by Slovak law. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing with legal requirements, and conducting thorough background checks where permissible. It requires an objective assessment of the applicant's character, temperament, and adherence to legal standards, prioritizing public safety above all else. When in doubt, seeking clarification or further information, and documenting every step of the decision-making process is crucial for ensuring compliance with Slovak firearms legislation and upholding ethical standards. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that a firearms license applicant in Slovakia for Group A, carrying of a firearm, has a diagnosed anxiety disorder. The applicant believes this condition is well managed with medication and does not directly impact their ability to safely handle a firearm. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to ensure compliance with Slovak firearms licensing regulations? Option A. Proactively disclose the diagnosed anxiety disorder to the licensing authority and be prepared to provide relevant medical documentation and opinions regarding their fitness to carry a firearm. Option B. Disclose the diagnosed anxiety disorder but downplay its severity to the licensing authority, emphasizing the medication's effectiveness. Option C. Omit the diagnosed anxiety disorder from the application, assuming it is manageable and not directly relevant to firearm safety. Option D. Wait for the licensing authority to specifically request information about any mental health conditions before providing details about the anxiety disorder. The correct answer is A. Proactively disclose the diagnosed anxiety disorder to the licensing authority and be prepared to provide relevant medical documentation and opinions regarding their fitness to carry a firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms license applicant in Slovakia concerning the carrying of a firearm. Group A. Challenge lies in accurately and truthfully representing one's physical and mental fitness for firearm possession, as required by Slovak law. Misrepresenting or omitting crucial information can lead to immediate denial of the license, potential legal repercussions, and a lasting negative record. Careful judgment is required to ensure all information provided is complete, accurate, and in compliance with the Firearms and Ammunition Act. Zakon o Zbrani Streliv. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively disclosing any medical conditions that could potentially affect one's ability to safely handle and carry a firearm, even if the applicant believes they are manageable. This approach aligns with the spirit and letter of the Firearms and Ammunition Act, which mandates that applicants must be medically fit and not suffer from conditions that would preclude safe firearm possession. By disclosing the diagnosed anxiety disorder, the applicant demonstrates honesty and allows the relevant authorities to conduct a thorough assessment of their fitness, potentially requiring a medical opinion. This proactive transparency is crucial for demonstrating responsible intent and adherence to legal requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the diagnosed anxiety disorder, believing it is manageable and not directly related to firearm use, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Slovak law requires a comprehensive assessment of an applicant's physical and mental health. Omitting such information prevents the authorities from conducting this mandated assessment, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to an individual who may pose a risk. This is a violation of the duty to provide truthful information during the application process. Minimizing the severity of the anxiety disorder to the licensing authority while still disclosing it is also professionally unacceptable. This approach attempts to circumvent the thorough medical evaluation process by downplaying a condition that is explicitly listed as a potential disqualifier or requires further medical scrutiny under Slovak firearms legislation. It demonstrates a lack of candor and an attempt to influence the decision-making process through incomplete or misleading information. Seeking a medical opinion only after being specifically asked by the licensing authority, rather than proactively providing it with the initial application, is a less ideal approach. While it may eventually lead to the necessary documentation, it introduces a delay and suggests a reactive rather than proactive stance on demonstrating fitness. The law encourages transparency from the outset, and delaying the provision of potentially crucial medical information can be viewed as less than fully cooperative. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the Firearms and Ammunition Act in Slovakia regarding medical fitness and disclosure. 2. Honestly assessing one's own health status against these requirements. 3. If any condition exists that is listed as a potential disqualifier or requires medical evaluation, proactively gathering relevant medical documentation and opinions. 4. Disclosing all relevant information truthfully and completely in the application. 5. Cooperating fully with any further requests for information or medical assessments from the licensing authority. This framework prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and the paramount importance of public safety. Question 9. Strategic planning requires that when developing new guidelines for the issuance of group of firearm licenses in Slovakia, which permit the carrying of a firearm, what stakeholder perspective should be given absolute priority to ensure compliance with public safety mandates? Option A. The perspectives of law enforcement agencies and public safety experts regarding the practical implications and risks associated with carrying firearms. Option B. The perspectives of businesses that would benefit from increased firearm ownership and related services. Option C. The perspectives of international firearm licensing bodies on general best practices, irrespective of specific Slovak legislation. Option D. The perspectives of firearm applicant advocacy groups emphasizing the rights and convenience of individuals seeking to carry firearms. The correct answer is A. The perspectives of law enforcement agencies and public safety experts regarding the practical implications and risks associated with carrying firearms. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of various stakeholder perspectives when developing policies for firearm licensing, particularly concerning the carrying of firearms in Slovakia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the rights of individuals seeking to carry firearms with the paramount public safety concerns and the strict legal framework governing firearms in Slovakia. Misinterpreting or inadequately addressing these perspectives can lead to ineffective policies, legal challenges, or a compromise of public security. The best approach involves a comprehensive stakeholder engagement process that prioritizes the perspectives of law enforcement agencies and public safety experts. This approach is correct because Slovak law, specifically the Act on Firearms and Ammunition, Zakon o zbrani streliv, places a significant emphasis on ensuring that the carrying of firearms by licensed individuals does not pose a threat to public order and safety. Law enforcement agencies are best positioned to assess the practical implications of carrying firearms, identify potential risks, and advise on necessary safeguards and training requirements that align with the Act's intent. Their input is crucial for developing licensing conditions that are both effective and legally sound, ensuring that the carrying of firearms is permitted only under strict conditions and for legitimate purposes, thereby upholding the public interest as mandated by the legislation. An approach that solely prioritizes the convenience of applicants without robust consultation with law enforcement would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the regulatory mandate to ensure public safety, potentially leading to the issuance of licenses without adequate risk assessment. Similarly, an approach that focuses exclusively on the potential economic benefits of a more lenient licensing system without considering the security implications would be ethically and legally flawed. It would neglect the primary objective of firearm regulation, which is to prevent misuse and maintain public order. Furthermore, an approach that relies solely on international best practices without tailoring them to the specific legal and social context of Slovakia would be problematic. While international comparisons can be informative, Slovak law dictates the specific requirements and limitations for firearm licensing, and any policy must adhere to these domestic regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the Slovak Act on Firearms and Ammunition and its implementing regulations. This should be followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders, including government bodies, Ministry of Interior, police, licensed firearm holders, potential applicants, and public safety advocacy groups. A structured consultation process involving public hearings, expert workshops, and written submissions should then be undertaken to gather diverse perspectives. The gathered information must be critically analyzed against the legal requirements and public safety objectives. Finally, policy recommendations should be formulated, clearly articulating how they address stakeholder concerns while remaining compliant with Slovak law and prioritizing public safety. Question 10. Market research demonstrates that applicants for a group of firearms license in Slovakia often underestimate the total annual financial commitment associated with firearm ownership. An applicant is applying for a group a license and has provided the following estimated annual expenses: an insurance premium of Euros 60, an estimated annual maintenance cost of Euros 40, and a projected expenditure of Euros 180 for ammunition. If the Slovak Firearms Act requires applicants to demonstrate an annual financial capacity equivalent to at least twice the sum of their fixed annual costs, insurance and maintenance, plus their projected ammunition expenditure, what is the minimum annual financial capacity the applicant must demonstrate? And what is the applicant's calculated total annual expenditure based on the provided figures? Option A. The applicant must demonstrate a minimum annual financial capacity of Euros 520, and their calculated total annual expenditure is Euros 280. Option B. The applicant must demonstrate a minimum annual financial capacity of Euros 200, and their calculated total annual expenditure is Euros 280. Option C. The applicant must demonstrate a minimum annual financial capacity of Euros 200, and their calculated total annual expenditure is Euros 220. Option D. The applicant must demonstrate a minimum annual financial capacity of Euros 520, and their calculated total annual expenditure is Euros 220. The correct answer is A. The applicant must demonstrate a minimum annual financial capacity of Euros 520, and their calculated total annual expenditure is Euros 280. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate and present financial information related to their firearm ownership, directly impacting their eligibility for a license in Slovakia. Miscalculations or misrepresentations can lead to denial of the license, potential legal repercussions, and a loss of trust with the licensing authority. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of their financial obligations and the specific requirements of Slovak firearms legislation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously calculating the total annual cost of firearm ownership, including all recurring expenses and factoring in a realistic estimate for ammunition. This approach directly addresses the core requirement of demonstrating financial capacity as stipulated by Slovak law for group of firearms licenses. Specifically, the applicant must sum the annual insurance premium, the estimated annual maintenance cost, and the projected annual ammunition expenditure. For instance, if the annual insurance is Euros 50, maintenance is Euros 30, and the applicant estimates needing 500 rounds of ammunition at Euros 0.30 per round, the total would be //text total annual cost equals /text insurance plus /text maintenance plus /text rounds /times /text cost per round /text total annual cost equals Euros 50 plus Euros 30 plus 500 times Euros 0.30 /text total annual cost equals Euros 50 plus Euros 30 plus Euros 150 equals Euros 230 /. This precise calculation demonstrates a thorough understanding and adherence to the financial requirements, ensuring the applicant meets the legal threshold for responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to only sum the fixed annual costs, insurance and maintenance, and ignore the variable cost of ammunition. This fails to account for a significant and often substantial expense associated with firearm ownership, thus not accurately reflecting the applicant's financial commitment and potentially understating their total annual expenditure. This would be a failure to comply with the spirit and letter of the law, which requires a comprehensive assessment of financial capacity. Another incorrect approach is to provide a rounded-up, arbitrary figure for the total annual cost without showing the breakdown of calculations. While appearing to be a safe overestimate, this lacks transparency and does not demonstrate the applicant's ability to perform the necessary financial diligence. The licensing authority requires evidence of accurate calculation, not just a seemingly sufficient number. This approach could be viewed as an attempt to circumvent detailed scrutiny, which is professionally unsound. A further incorrect approach is to only include the initial purchase price of the firearm and not any ongoing costs. The Slovak Firearms licensing framework for Group focuses on the ongoing financial responsibility of the owner, not just the initial acquisition. This approach fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the financial assessment required for license renewal and ongoing possession. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and transparent approach to financial documentation. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, Slovakia in this case, breaking down costs into their constituent parts, performing accurate calculations, and presenting the information clearly and legibly. A decision-making framework should prioritize accuracy, completeness, and adherence to regulatory mandates. When faced with financial calculations for licensing, professionals should always ask, does this calculation fully and accurately reflect all legally mandated financial considerations? And is this information presented in a way that is transparent and verifiable by the licensing authority? Question 11. The performance metrics show a slight increase in the number of reported incidents involving firearms in public spaces in Slovakia. As a law enforcement officer with a group, a firearms license, how should you best manage the carrying of your service firearm in public to uphold public safety and maintain public trust? Option A. Carry your service firearm in a manner that is not fully secured, such as in an unlatched holster, to ensure quick access in case of an emergency. Option B. Consistently adhere to all legal requirements for carrying a firearm in Slovakia, ensuring it is properly secured and concealed, and maintain a high level of situational awareness. Option C. Rely solely on your personal judgment regarding firearm carry, assuming your license permits you to carry it in any manner you deem appropriate at any given time. Option D. Openly display your service firearm while on routine patrol in public areas to deter potential criminals and reassure the public of your presence. The correct answer is B. Consistently adhere to all legal requirements for carrying a firearm in Slovakia, ensuring it is properly secured and concealed, and maintain a high level of situational awareness. Explanation. The performance metrics show a slight increase in the number of reported incidents involving firearms in public spaces in Slovakia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a law enforcement officer who is authorized to carry a firearm under Group of the Slovak Firearms License to balance their duty to public safety with the rights and perceptions of the general public. The officer must exercise sound judgment in deciding when and how to carry their firearm in a manner that is both lawful and minimizes unnecessary alarm. The best professional approach involves the officer consistently adhering to all legal requirements for carrying a firearm in Slovakia, including ensuring the firearm is properly secured and concealed as per Slovak law, and maintaining a high level of situational awareness. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Slovak legal framework governing the carrying of firearms by licensed individuals, which prioritizes public safety and responsible firearm possession. Ethical considerations also demand that officers act in a manner that does not cause undue fear or distress to the public, while still being prepared to act if necessary. An incorrect approach would be for the officer to openly display their firearm without a specific, immediate threat or operational requirement necessitating such an action. This fails to comply with the spirit and letter of Slovak regulations that generally mandate concealment for civilian carrying licensed individuals and can create unnecessary public apprehension, potentially leading to complaints or misunderstandings. Another incorrect approach would be for the officer to carry their firearm in a manner that is not properly secured, such as loosely in a bag or holster without a retention mechanism. This poses a significant safety risk, violating fundamental firearm safety principles and potentially contravening specific Slovak provisions on secure firearm transport, and could lead to accidental discharge or unauthorized access. A further incorrect approach would be for the officer to rely solely on their personal discretion, without consulting updated departmental guidelines or legal interpretations regarding firearm carry in evolving public spaces. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and adherence to established protocols, which are designed to ensure consistent and lawful application of firearm regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes a thorough understanding of current Slovak firearms legislation and departmental policies. This involves proactive engagement with training, staying informed about any changes in regulations or public perception, and consistently applying a risk-based assessment to their actions, always erring on the side of caution and public safety. Question 12. Stakeholder feedback indicates a concern that some applicants for a Slovak group of firearms license, carrying of a firearm, may be approved based on insufficient evidence of genuine need for self-defense. Considering the Slovak Act on Firearms and Ammunition, which of the following approaches best ensures responsible and lawful licensing while addressing this concern? Option A. Grant the license if the applicant expresses a strong personal belief in the necessity of carrying a firearm for self-defense, regardless of the depth of evidence provided. Option B. Deny the license if the applicant's stated reasons for self-defense are based on general anxieties rather than specific documented threats. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing the applicant's stated reasons for carrying a firearm with any supporting evidence and verifying that all statutory requirements for a license are met. Option D. Prioritize the applicant's reputation within their community as a primary factor in determining their suitability for carrying a firearm. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing the applicant's stated reasons for carrying a firearm with any supporting evidence and verifying that all statutory requirements for a license are met. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the strict requirements of Slovak firearms legislation for a licenses, specifically concerning the carrying of a firearm. The challenge lies in discerning genuine necessity from potential misuse or misinterpretation of the law, demanding a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's circumstances and the legal framework. A superficial review could lead to either an unwarranted denial or an inappropriate approval, both carrying significant legal and ethical consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous review of the applicant's submitted documentation, cross-referencing it with the specific criteria outlined in the Slovak Act on Firearms and Ammunition, Zakon o zbraniu streliv, for a licenses. This includes verifying the applicant's stated reasons for needing to carry a firearm, assessing the credibility of any threats or risks presented, and confirming that all legal prerequisites, such as age, mental and physical fitness, and absence of a criminal record, are met. The justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of lawful and responsible firearm licensing, ensuring that licenses are granted only to individuals who demonstrably meet the stringent requirements designed to protect public safety while respecting individual rights. This aligns with the Slovak legal framework's emphasis on a thorough, evidence-based assessment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the license based solely on the applicant's assertion of a perceived threat without independent verification or a detailed examination of the evidence supporting such a claim. This fails to adhere to the due diligence required by Slovak law, which mandates a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability and the genuine need for carrying a firearm. It risks issuing a license to someone who may not genuinely require it for self-defense or who may pose a risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license summarily because the applicant expresses a general fear for personal safety, without exploring the specifics of the situation or considering whether the applicant meets all other legal criteria. This approach may overlook legitimate grounds for self-defense as recognized by Slovak law, and could be seen as an arbitrary denial, failing to consider the full context of the applicant's situation and the legal provisions for a licenses. A further incorrect approach involves focusing primarily on the applicant's perceived character or social standing, rather than on the objective legal requirements and evidence. Slovak firearms legislation is based on specific criteria, not subjective judgments about an individual's general suitability outside of those defined legal parameters. This approach introduces bias and deviates from the legally mandated assessment process. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with evaluating firearms license applications in Slovakia should adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific requirements of the Slovak Act on Firearms and Ammunition for the relevant license group in this case. 2. Critically evaluating all submitted documentation, seeking corroborating evidence where necessary. 3. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment based on objective criteria, not subjective impressions. 4. Ensuring that the decision is justifiable under Slovak law and upholds public safety while respecting the rights of law-abiding citizens. Question 13. Regulatory review indicates that an applicant for a firearms license in Slovakia seeking A authorization for carrying a firearm has submitted an application. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for the applicant to demonstrate their eligibility for this specific license category? Option A. Provide a detailed written justification for the need to carry a firearm, supported by official documents or statements from relevant authorities or organizations that corroborate the applicant's claims of a legitimate and verifiable need. Option B. Include a collection of past self-defense training certificates and a general statement about wanting to be prepared for emergencies. Option C. Submit a general statement expressing a desire for personal protection due to a perceived sense of insecurity in the community. Option D. Focus exclusively on fulfilling the medical and psychological evaluation requirements without providing specific justification for carrying a firearm. The correct answer is A. Provide a detailed written justification for the need to carry a firearm, supported by official documents or statements from relevant authorities or organizations that corroborate the applicant's claims of a legitimate and verifiable need. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms license applicant in Slovakia seeking a license for carrying a firearm. The challenge lies in navigating the specific requirements and documentation mandated by Slovakian law, particularly concerning the applicant's stated purpose for carrying a firearm and the need for verifiable proof. Misinterpreting or failing to adequately address these requirements can lead to license denial, necessitating a thorough understanding of the legal framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously gathering and presenting all documentation required by the Slovak Ministry of Interior for a firearms license, with a specific emphasis on providing concrete evidence that supports the stated purpose for carrying a firearm. This includes, but is not limited to, a detailed written justification for the need to carry a firearm, supported by official documents or statements from relevant authorities or organizations that corroborate the applicant's claims. For instance, if the stated purpose is self-defense against specific documented threats, evidence of those threats, e.g., police reports, restraining orders, would be crucial. This approach directly addresses the core requirement of demonstrating a legitimate and verifiable need, as stipulated by Slovak firearms legislation, ensuring the application is robust and compliant. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to submit a general statement of self-defense without providing any supporting evidence, relying solely on the applicant's assertion of perceived danger. This fails to meet the legal standard in Slovakia, which requires demonstrable proof of a genuine and pressing need for carrying a firearm, moving beyond subjective feelings of insecurity. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on meeting the general health and background check requirements, while neglecting the specific justification for carrying a firearm. While these are necessary components, they do not fulfill the unique evidentiary burden for a license, which demands a clear and substantiated reason for the license. A further incorrect approach is to submit documentation that is outdated or irrelevant to the current stated purpose for carrying a firearm. Slovakian authorities expect current and pertinent evidence that directly supports the applicant's immediate need, and the submission of old or unrelated documents indicates a lack of diligence and understanding of the application's specific requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to license applications. This involves thoroughly researching the specific legal requirements of the relevant Slovakian authorities for the particular license type, group, in this case. They should then meticulously gather all mandated documents, paying close attention to any specific evidentiary requirements for the stated purpose. A proactive strategy of seeking clarification from the issuing authority, if any aspect of the requirements is unclear, is also essential. Finally, a comprehensive review of the submitted application package to ensure all criteria are met and all supporting documentation is current, relevant, and directly addresses the legal justifications for the license is paramount. Question 14. Performance analysis shows that an applicant for a Slovak a firearms license, carrying of a firearm, has recently experienced a period of significant personal stress, though no specific incidents of violence or misuse of firearms have occurred. The applicant is otherwise technically proficient with firearms. What is the most appropriate approach for the applicant to demonstrate their eligibility for the license under Slovak law? Option A. Submit a standard medical certificate confirming general good health, alongside proof of their marksmanship skills, and a written statement asserting their current mental stability. Option B. Present a self-written declaration of fitness and reliability, along with a letter from a friend attesting to their character during the stressful period. Option C. provide only evidence of their technical proficiency with firearms, such as training certificates and shooting scores, and a brief personal statement about their stress management. Option D. Obtain a detailed medical certificate from their treating physician, explicitly addressing the past stress, confirming current fitness, and stating it does not pose a risk to safe firearm handling, supplemented by evidence of ongoing well-being management. The correct answer is D. Obtain a detailed medical certificate from their treating physician, explicitly addressing the past stress, confirming current fitness, and stating it does not pose a risk to safe firearm handling, supplemented by evidence of ongoing well-being management. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a Slovak group of firearms license, carrying of a firearm, to navigate the subjective nature of demonstrating reliable knowledge of firearms and their use, while also proving they are not a risk to public safety. The challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to acquire a license with the state's obligation to ensure public safety, particularly when dealing with potentially sensitive personal circumstances. The applicant's recent history of stress and potential for emotional instability, even if not directly linked to violence, raises concerns that must be carefully assessed against the stringent requirements for carrying a firearm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant proactively and transparently providing comprehensive documentation that directly addresses the concerns raised by their recent period of stress. This includes obtaining a detailed medical certificate from their treating physician that not only confirms their current mental and physical fitness, but also explicitly states that the past period of stress has been successfully managed and does not pose a risk to their ability to safely handle a firearm. Furthermore, providing evidence of ongoing positive coping mechanisms or therapy, if applicable, demonstrates a commitment to maintaining well-being. This approach directly satisfies the Slovak legal requirement to prove reliable knowledge and fitness for carrying a firearm by providing objective, expert-backed evidence that mitigates potential risks. It aligns with the spirit of the Firearms and Ammunition Act, Zakon o Zbraniach Streliv, which mandates that applicants must be medically fit and not pose a danger. Incorrect approach is analysis. Submitting a generic medical certificate without specific commentary on the recent stress period is insufficient. This fails to directly address the potential concerns raised by the authorities and does not provide the necessary assurance that the applicant's past stress will not impact their ability to safely carry a firearm. It neglects the proactive duty to demonstrate fitness in light of known circumstances. Providing only a self-declaration of fitness without supporting medical evidence is fundamentally inadequate. The law requires objective proof of fitness, and a personal statement, while important, cannot substitute for professional medical assessment, especially when there are known factors that could raise questions about an applicant's suitability. This approach ignores the legal mandate for verifiable evidence, focusing solely on demonstrating technical proficiency with firearms, such as through marksmanship scores, while neglecting the psychological and medical aspects, is also flawed. While reliable knowledge of firearms is a requirement, it is only one part of the assessment. The Slovak legal framework places equal, if not greater, emphasis on the applicant's mental and physical state and their potential to be a danger to themselves or others. This approach creates an incomplete picture of the applicant's suitability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a risk mitigation and transparency-driven approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying potential red flags or areas of concern raised by the applicant's circumstances. 2. Understanding the specific legal requirements and the underlying intent of those regulations, in this case, public safety and responsible firearm ownership. 3. Proactively gathering and presenting evidence that directly addresses these concerns and demonstrates compliance with all legal mandates. 4. Prioritizing objective, expert-backed documentation over subjective statements. 5. Recognizing that the burden of proof lies with the applicant to demonstrate their fitness and reliability. Question 15. The efficiency study reveals that a Slovak citizen residing in Bratislava has applied for a group of firearms license for carrying a firearm for self-defense. The applicant states they feel increasingly unsafe due to rising crime rates in their neighborhood and wishes to carry a handgun for personal protection. They have provided a basic application form and a certificate of good conduct. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority in Slovakia? Option A. Grant the firearms license based on the applicant's stated fear and the provided certificate of good conduct, assuming that increased crime rates justify the need for personal protection. Option B. Deny the firearms license due to a general concern about the proliferation of firearms and the potential for misuse, irrespective of the applicant's individual circumstances. Option C. Request detailed documentation and evidence substantiating the applicant's specific, demonstrable need for carrying a firearm for self-defense, alongside proof of completed medical and psychological evaluations, and a clear understanding of safe firearm storage and handling as mandated by Slovak law. Option D. Issue a provisional license while further investigating the applicant's claims, without requiring immediate proof of safe storage and handling knowledge. The correct answer is C. Request detailed documentation and evidence substantiating the applicant's specific, demonstrable need for carrying a firearm for self-defense, alongside proof of completed medical and psychological evaluations, and a clear understanding of safe firearm storage and handling as mandated by Slovak law. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical juncture in the Slovak firearms licensing process for Group A carrying of a firearm. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the stringent requirements of Slovak law, specifically the Act on Firearms and Ammunition, Zakon o zbrani streliv, and its implementing decrees. The licensing authority must meticulously assess the applicant's genuine need, their reliability, and their understanding of safe firearm handling and storage, all while adhering to the principle of proportionality and avoiding arbitrary decisions. The correct approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's documented need for carrying a firearm for self-defense, coupled with a comprehensive evaluation of their psychological suitability and adherence to all legal requirements for safe storage and handling as stipulated by Slovak legislation. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core tenets of the Act on Firearms and Ammunition, which mandates that a license be granted only if the applicant demonstrates a legitimate need and is deemed reliable and capable of responsible firearm ownership. The law requires evidence of a genuine threat or a demonstrable risk that necessitates carrying a firearm, not merely a subjective feeling of insecurity. Furthermore, the applicant must prove they have undergone the required medical and psychological examinations and understand the legal obligations concerning firearm safety and storage. An incorrect approach would be to grant the license based solely on the applicant's assertion of fear, without requiring corroborating evidence or independent verification of their need. This fails to meet the legal standard of demonstrating a legitimate need, as defined by Slovak law, and risks issuing a license to someone who may not genuinely require it for self-defense, thereby undermining public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to deny the license based on a generalized concern about firearm ownership in the community, without a specific, legally justifiable reason related to the applicant's individual circumstances, reliability, or suitability. This constitutes an arbitrary denial and violates the principle that licenses should be granted when legal requirements are met. A further incorrect approach would be to approve the license without verifying the applicant's understanding of safe storage and handling requirements, or their completion of mandatory training. This overlooks crucial safety provisions within the Act on Firearms and Ammunition, which are designed to prevent accidental discharge, theft, or misuse of firearms. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based evaluation of each applicant against the specific legal criteria set forth in the Slovak Act on Firearms and Ammunition. This involves requesting and scrutinizing all required documentation, conducting interviews where necessary, and consulting relevant databases to verify the applicant's background and suitability. The process must be transparent, fair, and grounded in the legal framework, ensuring that decisions are objective and defensible. Question 16. Strategic planning requires assessing how different stakeholder interests are balanced when considering the issuance of Group of firearm licenses in Slovakia, particularly concerning the genuine need for carrying a firearm. Which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework for firearms licensing in Slovakia? Option A. Expedite the licensing process for applicants who are well-connected or can provide letters of recommendation from influential individuals, overlooking minor administrative oversights. Option B. Prioritize the applicant's social influence and reputation within their community as a primary factor in determining their suitability for a group license. Option C. Rigorously evaluate the applicant's demonstrated genuine need for carrying a firearm, supported by objective evidence, and ensure all other legal requirements of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act are met without exception. Option D. Grant a license if the applicant expresses a strong personal desire to carry a firearm for general self-protection due to perceived societal risks, even if specific, demonstrable threats are not evident. The correct answer is C. Rigorously evaluate the applicant's demonstrated genuine need for carrying a firearm, supported by objective evidence, and ensure all other legal requirements of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act are met without exception. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of various stakeholder perspectives when developing policies for firearm licensing. In Slovakia, the carrying of a firearm under Group A is a sensitive area governed by strict legal frameworks designed to balance public safety with the rights of licensed individuals. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the legitimate interests of firearm owners with the paramount public safety concerns of the wider Slovak population. Misinterpreting or misapplying the legal requirements for Group A licenses can lead to serious consequences, including the issuance of licenses to individuals who pose a risk, or conversely, the unjustified denial of licenses to eligible citizens, potentially leading to legal challenges and erosion of public trust. The decision-making process must be grounded in a thorough understanding of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's suitability, strictly adhering to the criteria outlined in the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act for Group A licenses. This includes verifying the applicant's clean criminal record, mental and physical fitness, and demonstrating a genuine need for carrying a firearm, as defined by the Act. The process must be objective, transparent, and documented, ensuring that all legal requirements are met without bias or undue influence. This approach upholds the integrity of the licensing system and prioritizes public safety while respecting the rights of law-abiding citizens. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing the applicant's perceived personal convenience or minor inconveniences as justification for carrying a firearm. This fails to meet the stringent genuine need requirement stipulated by Slovak law for Group A licenses, which typically relates to specific professional duties or demonstrable threats that necessitate carrying a firearm for self-defense. Another flawed approach is to grant a license based on the applicant's social standing or connections within the community. Slovak law mandates objective criteria for licensing, and personal influence or status cannot substitute for meeting legal requirements. This approach undermines the fairness and impartiality of the licensing process. A further unacceptable approach is to overlook minor discrepancies in an applicant's documentation or background checks, assuming they are insignificant. The Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act requires strict adherence to all stipulated conditions, and any deviation, however small, can indicate a lack of diligence or potential underlying issues that could compromise public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals involved in firearm licensing in Slovakia must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act and its specific provisions for Group A licenses. Each application should be evaluated against these legal criteria with a focus on objective evidence. Documentation must be meticulously reviewed, and any ambiguities or potential concerns should be thoroughly investigated. Transparency and fairness are crucial, ensuring that all applicants are treated equitably and that decisions are defensible under the law. Regular training and adherence to ethical guidelines are essential to maintain the integrity of the licensing system. Question 17. The audit findings indicate a recent incident where a licensed individual carrying a firearm in Bratislava was stopped by a police officer. The individual possessed a valid Group A firearms license, but had left the physical license document at their residence. The officer requested to see the license, which the individual could not immediately produce. Considering the regulatory framework of the Slovak Republic, which of the following actions best reflects the legally required and professionally responsible response in such a situation? Option A. The individual should have argued that possessing a valid license, even if not physically present, fulfills the legal requirement for carrying a firearm. Option B. The individual should have ensured their valid firearms license was physically on their person and readily available for presentation to the police officer upon lawful request. Option C. The individual should have offered to retrieve the firearms license from their residence, even if it meant leaving the firearm unattended temporarily. Option D. The individual should have provided the police officer with their personal identification and explained that the firearms license was at home, assuming this would be sufficient. The correct answer is B. The individual should have ensured their valid firearms license was physically on their person and readily available for presentation to the police officer upon lawful request. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to the Slovak Republic's firearms licensing regulations concerning the carrying of firearms. Group A. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the legal framework governing firearm possession and the responsibilities of licensed individuals, particularly when interacting with law enforcement or during routine checks. The core issue revolves around the proper documentation and presentation of a firearm license when carrying a firearm, a matter directly impacting public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. The correct approach involves proactively ensuring all required documentation is readily accessible and presented accurately to authorized personnel. This means carrying the valid firearms license and the firearm itself in a manner compliant with Slovak law, and being prepared to present both upon lawful request by a police officer or other authorized official. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the spirit and letter of the Firearms and Ammunition Act, Zakon o Zbrojniach Streliv of the Slovak Republic, which mandates that licensed individuals must be able to prove their right to carry a firearm. Failure to do so, even if possessing a valid license, can lead to immediate legal consequences, including confiscation of the firearm and potential license revocation. Ethical considerations also support this proactive stance, emphasizing responsibility and respect for the law. An incorrect approach would be to assume that simply possessing a valid license is sufficient, without considering the practical requirement of being able to present it. This might involve keeping the license at home or in a location not immediately accessible when carrying the firearm. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the explicit or implicit requirement for immediate verification of the right to carry. Another incorrect approach would be to argue with or resist lawful requests for inspection by authorities, even if ultimately possessing a valid license. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the authority of law enforcement and can escalate a situation unnecessarily, potentially leading to charges beyond simple documentation issues. A further incorrect approach would be to carry the firearm in a manner that is not compliant with Slovak regulations, such as being improperly concealed or openly displayed in prohibited areas, regardless of license status. This directly violates public safety provisions within the firearms legislation. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to legal requirements, proactive preparedness, and respectful engagement with authorities. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific provisions of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act, maintaining all required documentation in an accessible manner, and treating any interaction with law enforcement regarding firearm possession with utmost seriousness and cooperation. Question 18. The control framework reveals that an individual in Slovakia wishes to obtain a group of firearms license for carrying a firearm. Considering the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act, which of the following approaches best ensures a compliant and successful application process from the stakeholders' perspective? Option A. Submitting an application with only the basic personal details and a general statement of intent, assuming the authorities will request further information if needed. Option B. Providing a vague but plausible reason for carrying a firearm, such as personal security, without providing specific evidence or documentation to support this claim. Option C. Meticulously gathering all required documentation, including proof of a legitimate reason, medical and psychological assessments, and a clean criminal record, and submitting this comprehensive application to the relevant regional police directorate in Slovakia. Option D. Attempting to expedite the process by personally delivering the application to a known contact within the regional police directorate, bypassing the standard submission procedures. The correct answer is C. Meticulously gathering all required documentation, including proof of a legitimate reason, medical and psychological assessments, and a clean criminal record, and submitting this comprehensive application to the relevant regional police directorate in Slovakia. Explanation. The control framework reveals that the Slovak Ministry of Interior, through its regional directorates, is responsible for issuing firearms licenses for Group A, carrying of a firearm. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only a legitimate reason for carrying a firearm, but also to prove their reliability and suitability, which involves a thorough assessment of their personal circumstances and past conduct. The decision-making process must be rigorous and adhere strictly to the provisions of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act. Zakon o Zbraniach Streliv. The correct approach involves the applicant meticulously gathering all required documentation, including proof of a legitimate reason for carrying a firearm, e.g., self-defense, professional duties, a medical certificate confirming their physical and mental fitness, a psychological assessment, and a clean criminal record. They must then submit this comprehensive application to the relevant regional police directorate in Slovakia. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal requirements stipulated by the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act, ensuring that all necessary evidence of suitability and legitimate need is presented for the authorities to make an informed decision. Adherence to these specific documentation and submission requirements is paramount for a successful application and demonstrates the applicant's commitment to complying with Slovak law. An incorrect approach would be to submit an incomplete application, omitting crucial documents such as the medical certificate or the psychological assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the explicit requirements of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act, which mandates these assessments to ensure the applicant's fitness and reliability. Such an omission would likely lead to the immediate rejection of the application, as the authorities cannot fulfill their duty to assess the applicant's suitability without this vital information. Another incorrect approach would be to misrepresent the reason for carrying a firearm, for instance, by claiming self-defense when the actual intent is for sport shooting, or by providing false information on the application form. This is ethically and legally reprehensible. The Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act requires a genuine and demonstrable legitimate reason. Providing false information constitutes a criminal offense and a severe breach of trust, undermining the entire licensing process and potentially leading to severe legal consequences beyond the denial of the license. A further incorrect approach would be to attempt to bypass the formal application process by directly contacting individual police officers or officials outside of the established procedure. This is unprofessional and ineffective. The Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act clearly outlines the designated authority, regional police directorates, and the formal application channels. Circumventing these established procedures demonstrates a lack of understanding of and respect for the legal framework, and such attempts would be disregarded by the authorities. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing a thorough understanding of the specific legal requirements of the Slovak Firearms and Ammunition Act. This involves meticulously reviewing the application guidelines, ensuring all supporting documents are accurate and complete, and submitting the application through the designated official channels. A commitment to transparency, honesty, and strict adherence to the law is the cornerstone of responsible firearm licensing. Question 19. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of various perspectives when formulating Slovakia's Group of Firearms License regulations. Which approach best ensures that policy development is both effective for public safety and respects the rights of licensed individuals? Option A. Strictly adhere to the minimum legal requirements for individual applicants, focusing solely on their stated reasons for carrying a firearm. Option B. Prioritize the recommendations of law enforcement agencies exclusively, assuming their perspective encompasses all necessary public safety considerations. Option C. Implement policies based on the most vocal public opinion, without formal consultation with relevant stakeholder groups. Option D. Proactively engage with law enforcement, firearm owner associations, and public safety experts to gather comprehensive input and inform policy development. Correct answer is D. Proactively engage with law enforcement, firearm owner associations, and public safety experts to gather comprehensive input and inform policy development. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of various stakeholder perspectives when developing policies for firearm licensing in Slovakia, particularly concerning group licenses for carrying firearms. This scenario is professionally challenging because it necessitates balancing the rights and responsibilities of individual applicants with the overarching public safety mandate of the state. Misinterpreting or neglecting the concerns of any key stakeholder group can lead to flawed policy, increased risk, or legal challenges. The best professional approach involves proactively engaging with all relevant stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, firearm owner associations, and public safety experts, to gather comprehensive input. This collaborative process ensures that policy development is informed by diverse viewpoints and practical considerations, leading to regulations that are both effective in maintaining public safety and fair to licensed individuals. Specifically, under Slovak law, the issuance of a firearm license is a discretionary act by the competent authority, requiring a thorough assessment of the applicant's suitability and the potential risks. Engaging with stakeholders helps the authority understand potential societal impacts and refine the criteria for suitability beyond just the applicant's individual profile, aligning with the principle of public order and security enshrined in Slovak legislation. An incorrect approach would be to solely prioritize the views of law enforcement without considering the legitimate interests and concerns of law-abiding firearm owners, potentially leading to overly restrictive or impractical regulations that could be challenged on grounds of proportionality or discrimination. This fails to acknowledge the rights of citizens to possess firearms for lawful purposes, as recognized within the Slovak legal framework, and could foster distrust between authorities and the applicant community. Another incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the applicant's stated intent for carrying a firearm, such as self-defense, without adequately assessing the broader societal implications or the potential for misuse. Slovak law requires a demonstration of a serious reason for carrying a firearm, which implies a need for a robust assessment that goes beyond mere personal assertion and considers the wider public safety context. Ignoring input from public safety experts or community representatives in this regard would be a significant oversight. Finally, adopting a purely bureaucratic approach that strictly adheres to minimum legal requirements without seeking broader input or considering evolving societal expectations would be professionally deficient. While compliance with the law is paramount, effective policy development in this sensitive area requires a more proactive and inclusive strategy that anticipates potential issues and fosters a shared understanding of responsibilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their potential interests. This is followed by a systematic process of information gathering and consultation, ensuring that all perspectives are heard and understood. The gathered information is then analyzed against the specific legal requirements of Slovak firearms legislation, with a focus on balancing individual rights with public safety. Finally, policy recommendations are formulated based on this comprehensive analysis, with a clear justification for how they address the identified needs and legal obligations. Question 20. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a Slovakian citizen applying for a firearm license for carrying a firearm needs to accurately project their total expenditure over a 5-year period. The initial license application fee is Euros 150, with an annual renewal fee of Euros 50. Secure storage in a certified safe costs Euros 300 upfront, with an estimated annual maintenance cost of Euros 10. Ammunition is projected to cost Euros 200 per year, and an annual maintenance check for the firearm is estimated at Euros 40. If the citizen plans to renew their license for the full 5 years, what is the total projected cost of firearm ownership under these conditions? Option A, Euros 1,900. Option B, Euros 1,700. Option C, Euros 2,150. Option D, Euros 1,500. The correct answer is C, Euros 2,150. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the financial implications of firearm ownership under Slovakian law, specifically concerning group licenses for carrying firearms. The complexity arises from the need to integrate variable costs, ammunition, maintenance, with fixed costs, license fees, storage, and to project these over a defined period, while also considering potential future regulatory changes or unforeseen expenses. Accurate financial forecasting is crucial for responsible firearm ownership, and for demonstrating financial capacity as potentially required by law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive calculation that accounts for all direct and indirect costs associated with firearm ownership for a group, a license in Slovakia over a specified period. This includes the initial license application fee, annual renewal fees, secure storage requirements, e.g., safe purchase or rental, mandatory training or qualification costs, and an estimated budget for ammunition and regular maintenance. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principle of responsible ownership, which necessitates a clear understanding of the financial commitment involved. While Slovakian law for Group A licenses primarily focuses on safety and suitability, demonstrating financial prudence indirectly supports the applicant's overall responsibility. A detailed breakdown ensures that all potential expenditures are considered, preventing unexpected financial burdens. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only consider the initial license application fee and annual renewal fee. This fails to account for the ongoing and significant costs of ammunition, maintenance, and secure storage, which are essential for the legal and safe possession of a firearm. This approach is financially irresponsible and does not reflect the true cost of ownership. Another incorrect approach is to estimate costs based solely on the price of the firearm itself, ignoring all associated licensing, maintenance, and operational expenses. This is fundamentally flawed as it overlooks the majority of the financial commitment required for legal firearm possession and carrying. A further incorrect approach is to project costs based on a single year's expenses without considering potential increases in fees, ammunition prices, or the need for more frequent maintenance over time. This short-sighted financial planning can lead to underestimation and financial strain. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to financial forecasting for firearm ownership. This involves 1. Identifying all statutory fees and requirements specific to the Slovakian Firearms Act for Group A licenses. 2. Researching current market prices for essential items like ammunition and secure storage solutions. 3. Estimating variable costs based on projected usage patterns. 4. Projecting these costs over a realistic timeframe, e.g., 5 years, to account for inflation and potential price fluctuation. 5. Including a contingency fund for unforeseen expenses. This structured method ensures accuracy, promotes responsible financial management, and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the commitment involved in firearm ownership.